Hi, this is János, it's Real World Audio, and today I'm looking at a question, and this question was asked by Derek Viveros, and it relates to the lifespan of vacuum tubes in tube amplifiers. And this is what he shared with us, so I'm going to share it with you in case you haven't read that post yet. So he said that I've only had one tube amplifier, but the thought of playing it 5 to 10 hours a day would mean new tubes pretty frequently. Am I missing something? I do like playing music in the background a lot, which is part of the reason why I went solid state. So basically he commented that because I've been saying that I run my tube amps like 5-10 hours a day, and then yeah, I guess that there is a disconnect here, because what I've been sharing in my previous videos, that I do this, I run the tube amps on. Sometimes I just don't even turn them off for a week or something like that, but they've been running like that for years and years and years. Like this set of tubes in them is like at least 8 years old, and they're still fine. They don't show any signs of requiring a change or something like that. And so what is that major disconnect that we are seeing? Because for myself, I am not using solid states because they wear out much faster than properly run vacuum tubes do. And also, the thing with solid states, that once your transistor blows, you can't replace it, because there are sometimes, if you have spare transistors in your shelf, sure, you can do. But if you have bought a commercial amp and it's like 20-30 years old, if you are really lucky, then you can find spare transistors and change it. But what I have noticed, what my mentor has noticed, who had a stereo repair shop, that basically 98% of the solid state amplifiers that require a transistor change, forget it, they are landfill. So just by watching like hundreds of customers bringing gear and him repairing stuff, basically all of the tube amplifiers are still running. They can be repaired, you can change the tubes, but the solid states are, well, I personally participated in about at least 50 truckloads of solid state amps being brought to landfill. So I have to share with you guys that I had suffered traumatic experience by seeing so many solid state gear end up in landfill, because they are not repairable anymore. So for me, when I look at any solid state gear, the label landfill is the first thing that comes to my mind, and that's because I've seen so many of them end up in landfill. And with vacuum tube amps, that's not the case. Only for the drags of the vacuum tube amps, where they were just manufactured for such poor quality, with circuit boards, like really massive, low quality circuit boards. But even then, you just did the circuit board and just rework the amp. But for solid state amplifiers, the trouble is usually way too much, and if you don't have that kind of freedom to repair a solid state amp, because it's like the whole thing is sitting on a circuit board. You cannot do those kind of major surgeries you do with a tube amplifier. However, I really run a few steps ahead of myself here, because I'm now talking about really long term, like lifespan of an amplifier being limited to a few decades versus a century or more. but Derek's concern, and most of your concern, is really about right away. What happens when the tubes get too tired, when they just burn out, and that's a very, very sad picture. And it's not a sad picture because tube amps are bad, but because of the commercial amplifiers that employ vacuum tubes, the way they are produced and the way the market demands have driven the manufacturers to optimize their amplifiers. They have been optimized to run the vacuum tubes hard. So it means that running most of the amplifiers you can get are running the power tubes at 100% plate dissipation or even higher. What does that mean? For when you look at the data sheet for every vacuum tube, it specifies what is the plate dissipation of the vacuum tube, and it's given in a watts measure. How many watts is the plate dissipation that the tube can handle for a specified lifespan. And if you go higher than that specified plate dissipation, then you are running the tube hotter than you are supposed to run it per manufacturer, and that will lead to two things. One of the things is a higher power output. And because of that idiotic power race that we have, that is 110% fueled by the idiotic measurement war that's been going on, that basically all the customers are duped into buying products based on the stickers that you have on the labels, like is it 50 watts or 55 watts or 60 watts output. Of course, if you can choose between 50, 55 or 60 watts, you are going for the one that gives you 60 watts output, right? Even if you go for like a 300B tube amplifier, would you go for the one that gives you 6 watt power output or the one that gives you 9 or 10 watt output for a tube that's supposed to give you 8 watts at most? And are you wondering why you have to change your tubes every 3 months? That's because that's not how that tube was designed to operate. So that's the reason why we are seeing these atrocious, awful, pitiful lifespan for vacuum tubes, for power tubes in the tube amplifiers, because the tubes are being butchered and murdered by those designers who don't design for sound quality, but they design for demands for higher figures on paper because that looks good, and we are giving a slight margin for that amplifier to drive such loudspeakers a tiny bit better, which should never be driven by those amplifiers. So it's a lose-lose war on all fronts. And okay, so one more step to this story, or one more side, is that when we are speaking of tubes burning up, it's practically always we are talking about the power tubes, the tubes in the power stage, because those are the ones that are being really driven really hard. And those tubes, which are the input tubes or the tubes in your preamp, are generally handled much more properly. They are not driven to death, and usually in your amplifier you never need, in the entire lifetime of the tube amp, you need not change the driver tube inside the amplifier, only the power tube. If it's a crappily designed, mass-produced piece of specifications war winner, then maybe you will have to change the tubes every half year if you are using it decently, like couple hours of use every day. But if it's properly designed and not for just numbers, not for selling, for loudspeakers that should not be driven by those amps, if it's something proper, designed by someone whose goal is not to keep on selling you vacuum tubes by the dozen per year, because just think about that. That's the other side of this industry. That if your amplifier eats vacuum tubes for breakfast, then you are going to make a pretty money on keep supplying the patient with vacuum tubes every year, right? And the fancier the vacuum tube, the more they are making on this poor amplifier. And within a few years, actually the person who sold you the amp is going to make more on the tubes than they made on selling the amp. So it's a fantastic opportunity for a business to thrive on the customer. So that's one thing, but that creates this false impression in people that tube amplifiers have a poor lifespan. You can't use them for your enjoyment on a long basis. Just maybe turn it on like once a week for half an hour and not more, because those precious tubes will burn out. If you have these types of amplifiers, then you have been cheated and wronged very, very badly. Yeah, I'm just telling it fair and square. If you have a conscious equipment designer who has your best interest at heart and who was designing that amplifier to have to bring out the best sound from the gear, and not in a bass that's a showy sign, but a most natural sign, then that amplifier will live forever with those sets of power tubes which are inside. And why I am saying that is that because depending on how much the dissipation of the power tube is, it will have a very different character of sound to it. So if you are running it at 100% or harder, the harder you run it, the more straining the sound of the amplifier will be. And you will perceive that straining in the sound at first with lower quality sources and lower quality loudspeakers, as if it had way more power than it has, and it will make it sound like solid state gear. And it's very interesting because you will be getting a lot of extra distortion coming out, and distortion as is perceived by your human hearing, not as measured by oscilloscope or anything, but something that's hard, that's fatiguing. So when there is fatigue, it means distortion for the brain, the real distortion. And when you put the plate dissipation, you drop it lower, then the tube is not straining. So it's allowed to perform naturally without being overtaxed. It's like you have a worker, and if you run the tube at super high plate dissipation, it's like having an employee and making that employee work 20-hour days. Yeah, you are going to see higher productivity. If it's a factory, like crunching out shoes, you will have a much higher shoe count compared to like an 8-hour work day, more than twice as many shoes. But try to wear those shoes. They will be of very poor quality compared to the other worker who is well rested and is still has all the brains and faculties, just working regular shifts. And that's it. That's how the vacuum tubes work as well. So if you are just murdering and butchering a vacuum tube, then the sound will be compromised, lifespan will be severely compromised. The only benefit will be is that it will make the impression that it will sound more powerful with those types of loudspeakers that are not matched for it, that are designed for high feedback solid state gear that can put out a lot of current. And that's why the vacuum tube industry is such a deep doo-doo, because they try to turn around and compete with that sector. But that's really bastardizing tube amplifiers. That's not how they are supposed to be run. That's not how they were created, not how the technology was created. And you are just not using maybe like 10% of the potential of what vacuum tubes can bring to you. And the potential that you can bring out for them is when they drive proper loudspeakers that are designed to work with tube amplifiers. And then you will notice that if the amp is designed with proper plate dissipation, it will just sound so much better. Then you will be able to listen to that amplifier like 10-12 hours a day, because there's zero fatigue in it and it's a joy to listen. And when you are running a tube very hard, like 120-130% plate dissipation, after an hour or so you will tire listening to it. Two reasons. One, you can't run them 10 hours a day, and even if, because they die on you. And two, even if you could, you would not, because your ears will tell you that I had enough of this. I can't listen to that for 10 hours. And I think that's my comment on this. And just by saying, I want to add like 3 more short pieces of advice on it. The amplifiers I built for myself, all of them basically don't need any power tube change. If I want, I can leave them on and never turn them off. I just do it for safety reasons and to spare with electricity. And even after 8 years, and no one can notice that the tubes have aged. They just sound as when they were new and broken in. And same is true for my darling amplifier, still using original set of tubes, 20 years, not bad, right? And still life in them after 20 years, enough to use them. How about that? And what about some commercial ones like the Dynaco Stereo 70, for example, which is like a super Asian design and came out a little before this idiotic war for measurements really kicked to the next level. Even with that was my first tube amp, and I had like the Softec tubes in it, and they lasted exactly 1 year and then burned out, all 4 almost at the same time. And for that, what you can do and what happens there is that it's also a comment on modern production tubes, because other Dynaco Stereo 70s with the Mallard tubes, they've been running for like 10, 20, 30 years, provided that you bias them properly, not run them super hard, but bias them at a lower current, and then they will live forever. Of course, if you bias them to run as hot potatoes, they will also age on you faster, but still, even like that, you will get like 5-6 years out of them compared to the 1 year of modern production tubes. So these are the 2 things to keep in mind. One of them is that your amplifier should not be built to mass production, fast food standards. To me, I don't even, I'm not even want to say any more comments on that. And then the number 2 thing is that the quality of the vacuum tube. Most modern production tubes are a really long life is not a consideration. They are really atrocious compared to the new old stock tubes that were made like in the 50s, 60s. They were designed back then to have really long tube life, and that's why I like to use them. And even if it's like 5 times more expensive, but it lasts you 20 times longer, it's still 4 times cheaper than buying those new tubes. So basically, if you get like a set of new old stock US, American tubes, or German tubes or British tubes, and you use it in an amplifier that runs the tubes at something like less than 70% plate dissipation, maybe like 55-60% plate dissipation, then those tubes will last you a lifetime and will outlast any solid state gear you ever owned. So thank you for this wonderful comment, and I hope this answer helps everyone a little bit, and just makes us wish that amplifier makers really focused more on designing things properly and treating vacuum tubes the way they should be treated, and operating them the way they were designed to operate, and not in a way to bring them to the grave prematurely. And in this channel I had already plenty of advice, and I think I already shared enough that anyone can modify their gear for the tubes to last longer. Of course, under anyone I mean if you know what you are doing. If you don't, then don't just open up a tube amplifier. You will succeed only in one thing: killing yourself. So safety first, and don't do anything that you are not familiar with. And have an awesome day, and cheers. Bye bye.